Hello and welcome to Good Nightmare, a podcast where I kind of blacked out for about 30 minutes at work today and wrote this episode. Today's episode is a little different from what I usually put out. It's not a murder as such, and it's not a fairy tale, nor is it an oddity. It's about being buried alive. The fear of being buried alive is one of the most common phobias. The official name is taphophobia, which translates to fear of graves. Premature burial, or live burial, occurs when a person or animal is accidentally or purposely buried alive. They may have mistakenly been declared dead, or have been buried as a form of torture, or in some cases, as with magicians, be buried with consent as a trick or a stunt with a plan to escape. Death following being buried alive is usually caused by asphyxiation, starvation or dehydration if you live long enough, or hypothermia in colder climates. There are a few notable cases of premature burial, as well as plenty of folklore. One of the first ever reported stories, which may have been folklore itself, similar to a Bible story, was that of a man named John Duns Scotus. This case occurred in the 1300s. John was a philosopher at the time, who was placed inside a coffin and then inside a tomb after being incorrectly declared dead. It was said that upon opening the tomb, John was found laying outside of his own coffin. His nails and hands were torn to shreds from attempting to escape. In the 1600s, a woman named Alice Blunden was said to have been buried alive twice. Her husband described her as a fat, gross woman who enjoyed drinking brandy. It was after a long night of drinking that Alice fell into a deep sleep and couldn't be awakened. Her husband called a physician to check on her, but she was ultimately declared dead, and when he went on business leave, the family decided that the weather was too hot and Alice's body was in no condition to be kept until his return, and so they buried her while he was away. It was only days later that children heard a voice coming from her grave, and she was dug up. She was found badly bruised, likely from having tried to escape. When she was brought up from her grave, she was again assumed dead after showing no further signs of life, and was reburied overnight. The coroner was organised to visit the following morning to determine her cause of death and to understand how this could have happened. Unfortunately, upon the coroner's arrival and the exhumation of her body, it was found that she was further bloodied and dishevelled as a result of having been buried alive again. When she was buried for the third and final time, she was most definitely dead. While the actual number of cases of accidental premature burial aren't as high as we would think, they have occurred even in modern history. In 2001, for example, a body was delivered to a funeral home inside a body bag. It was discovered upon arrival that the occupant was in fact alive. Fortunately, the director of the funeral home called paramedics upon discovering this, before any embalming process, let alone burial, could take place. As recent as 2014 in Greece, a 45-year-old woman was found to have been buried alive and to have died of asphyxiation after she was declared dead at a private hospital and subsequently buried. Her body was discovered when children playing near the area heard screams from her grave. In the same year, a 49-year-old woman was buried alive after being declared dead. It was found that the medicine she'd been given by her doctors to treat her cancer had put her into such a state that her doctors declared her clinically dead. In a tragic turn, it was her family that reported they could hear her screaming from within her grave after the burial. The woman ultimately died of heart failure in her own coffin. Given the prevalence of premature burial, or at least the high risk, in the 17 to 1800s, some precautions were taken to either prevent live burial or to allow victims a way out. In 1890, a burial vault was built that had hatches on the inside that would allow a person to escape from within if they were to find themselves entombed, but alive. Robert Robinson had a glass pane inserted in his coffin and his mausoleum door, and hired a watchman to check periodically after his death and burial for any signs of breath on the glass to ensure that he was indeed dead. Safety coffins, which use a kind of periscope mechanism that would allow air to reach the buried person, as well as provide a signal that someone was buried alive when it was moved, were created in the 1800s. There are no records of these coffins actually saving anyone, and, ironically perhaps, the natural decomposition of the body involving swelling, sound and movement would often cause false alarms, so to speak, where the safety mechanism would be activated, though the person inside was very dead. The issue, in fact, was apparently so prevalent in the 1800s that William Tebb and Walter Hadwin founded the London Association for the Prevention of Premature Burial in 1896. There was speculation that the terms dead ringer, saved by the bell, and graveyard shift were associated with the safety coffins that we just heard about. Some coffins were said to have been equipped with a bell, with a string attached to one end of the bell and the other attached to the wrist of the deceased. Should the person move upon finding themselves alive and in the dark, they would ring the bell. However, this myth was busted. I've always wanted to say that. I can't imagine this episode has done much to dispel anyone's fears of accidental premature burial, though with modern medicine and machines that can monitor our breathing, brain activity and heart rate, we can only assume or hope that the chances of mistakenly being declared dead are now quite slim. Now let's all collectively hope that we never hear of another case of accidental premature burial in our lifetime. If you have another phobia suggestion or strange case suggestion similar to this that you would like to hear on the podcast, please send me a message at goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. For updates about the podcast and episode releases, you can catch me on Twitter at goodnightmare_s. If you prefer imagery, you can find me on Instagram at goodnightmare_s. And if you like a place to chat and discuss cases with a group, you can join us on Good Nightmare Pod on Facebook. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed writing it. I have to say, out of a lot of the cases I've done and topics I've covered, this is the first one that's really gotten under my skin. As always, thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for a promo from another great podcast. And until next time, sweet dreams.
Hi, true crime fans. I'm Erin.
And I'm Shay. We host All Crime No Cattle, a conversational podcast which focuses on true crime stories from the Lone Star State.
We strive to bring you a balanced and well-researched story about Texas cases big and small.
We do the research so you don't have to.
We also end every episode with a good news story, just to remind everyone that real life isn't quite as depressing as true crime can make it out to be.
New episodes drop every Thursday, and you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. All Crime No Cattle, because crime is bigger in Texas, y'all.